Hello, and thank you for joining us for the September session of From the Bench Virtual Studio Tour Series. My name is Chad, and I'm the studio director here at San Francisco Center for the Book. Today, we're happy to welcome Mitchel Gundrum as our guest artist. And before I read Mitchel's bio, I would just say we're super excited I'm super excited for this one, particularly because I got to work with Mitchel many years ago. I think he's going to talk about it a little bit, but starting out here at SFCB. So we're super excited to see him come back here and join us in this now as a book conservator, but B, just to hear all about what he's been doing in the years hence. So without further ado, Mitchel Gundrum is a bookbinder, conservator, and researcher of historical book structures and decorated papers. He began his training at San Francisco Center for the Book afterward, earning a diploma in traditional bookbinding techniques from North Bennet Street School and an MA in book conservation from West Dean College. He has previously worked in the U.S. National Archives, the American Antiquarian Society, and UCLA, and taught workshops in book repair and related arts at North Bennet Street School, Pyramid Atlantic Art Center, and West Dean College. Recent and upcoming projects include a peer-reviewed article identifying the toxic yellow pigment orpiment as a 17th century textblock edge colorant, an online catalog exploring their personal collection of decorated paper and paper bindings, and a research trip to Museum Plantin-Moretus in Antwerp to study the earliest known European bookbinding manual from 1612. He currently works as a book conservator at the Huntington. Welcome, Mitch, and I'm going to highlight you and let you take it away.
All right. I will share my screen. Learned this from watching Aaron Fletcher's talk so that I'm not walking you around and giving you seasickness. So thanks, Aaron. Hello again to everyone. My name is Mitchel. Thank you everyone who's here and able to join, or anyone who's planning to watch the recording later. As Chad mentioned, I really am especially grateful to be here because everything I'm about to talk about as far as bookbinding, conservation, and decorated papers, and just craft in general really started with my time at the San Francisco Center for the Book. And I will continue to credit them with setting me on this path toward the person that I want to be. So thank you again for having me and for everything else. So a little bit about me, already mentioned. After attending Center for the Book classes for 2 or 3 years, taking the core workshops and the repair workshops, I completed a 2-year full-time bookbinding program at North Bennet Street School, and then proceeded to my master's program at West Dean and did a variety of short-term conservation positions before landing my first full-time position as a permanent book conservator at the Huntington in San Marino. I worked there with a small team of conservators to steward the collection's 12 plus million items. It might even be up to like 14 million because they're still cataloging things that they've had for a while. But each of us in that team have specialized skill sets in books, photographs, works of art on paper, and paintings. And I also at home take private bookbinding and repair commissions. And I also conduct my own research on various historical bookbinding and decorated paper topics, which I will get to in just a little bit. So I hope this isn't against the rules, but I actually have 2 benches that I'm going to be sharing from today. Make the most of my time here, and they are quite distinct and well calibrated for the work that I do at each of them. So I'm sitting at home today, but I'll get to that in a second. We'll start with my bench at the Huntington in the lab, which, as you can see, is very spacious and well equipped. I've got all of my solvents and adhesives sitting in the corner there at the front. I've got cutting mats on all sides, drawers and cabinets, flat files, and there's even a light table built into my bench for transmitted light photography and for close working. It really does look like this most of the time, pretty sterile. I'm kind of in the habit of putting all of my tools and materials away at the end of each day, which is not a requirement by any stretch, but it also doesn't hurt because, with 8 of us treating 12 plus million items, there's always going to be more items than there are people to work on them. And I've often got multiple projects rotating across my bench at any given time in different states of completion. And it's a lot easier to be zen in the middle of a leather reback if there's plenty of space and all of my tools are exactly where I expect them to be. We have multiple big sinks and a deionized water system for washing and humidification of paper documents, along with chemical storage cabinets, a leaf casting machine, which is a sort of mechanized paper making vat, a dirty room for sequestering messier tasks such as tool making, sharpening, leather paring, and dyeing and toning in a spray booth, and also mold remediation. And we have a standalone fume hood, particulate fume hood, the germ-free system you can see there. Photo documentation is the first physical step of every conservation treatment, recording the state of the object that it's in before we have any involvement or interference. And in addition to the DSLR camera setup that you see there on the copy stand, we can also do some infrared and UV photography. And we also have an LEO scanning XRF system for elemental analysis of paintings, illuminations, illustrations, and other materials. And you can see there a spectra for a hazardous arsenic green book that I measured a few weeks back. So what do conservators do exactly? So in this space, I classify myself as a steward of library cultural heritage that's responsible for the safekeeping and, most importantly, providing safe access to all of those collections materials. The raw fact of these materials is that the art would last a lot longer if we just locked it in a dark, freezing vault somewhere and never looked at it or interacted with it. But my job exists to try and strike a balance between preserving the objects for posterity and making them available for appreciation today, which is the point of art after all. The treatment that I do, that we all do at the Huntington, is broken into 3 main categories. The first one is collections care, which is a sort of general maintenance of the collection, checking up on the stacks, mending books as they get called up by researchers, improving storage and housing. Because there are millions of items and only 8 of us, we work closely with curators, catalogers, and public researchers to establish which books are most heavily consulted, which present the most dire conservation issues, and which can be reformatted in order to avoid additional damage by handling the originals. And we develop our priorities again for those 12 million items based on these factors, sort of what gets used, what's going into an exhibition. The second large group is exhibition prep. So that's specifically assessing items and preparing artworks for long-term opening if it's a book, or exposure to light and air in a display case, cradle, or frame. This requires an awareness of the media that's used, and how likely it is to fade over time, and how well the book opens and whether it can be safely held open for viewing without causing damage, along with just sort of a general understanding that the effects of oxidation and UV exposure are cumulative. So we avoid permanent exhibition as much as possible by including page turns. If we're going to show a particular book, we'll turn a page every 3 months to avoid fading. Sometimes there are multiple volumes that we can swap in and out, or sometimes we even create facsimiles for very important books. Finally, there's digitization prep, an important avenue for accessing collections in the 21st century. And while many people love to actually visit the Huntington and see the real item sitting in front of them up close, it's not always possible for everybody to visit the Huntington, and it's not always possible to have everything on display at all times. So we have a dedicated imaging team, whole department that reproduces high resolution images of of our collections so that researchers and admirers around the world can engage with them. We have a public-facing digital library. We can create images for people to view without having to handle fragile objects, etc. And our conservation staff really works closely with the digitization staff to make sure that all of these objects are stable enough to go under a camera, so that the act of digitizing doesn't cause damage. There is, however, more to conservation than just treatment. Our team also performs a great deal of preservation and preventative work, which involves monitoring exhibit and storage spaces to maintain safe temperature and humidity levels, and also integrated pest management to both track and respond to pest fluctuations throughout the year, and in different spaces across exhibition, storage, and workspaces. And this is not a book there from our collection, that was one from a while ago, but that's the sort of thing we want to avoid with that squash bug. Similarly, there's more to me to access and providing access than simply opening the reading room to the public or handing somebody a rare book without context. The time that conservators get to spend with a rare book or any particular object, and the intimate interactions that we are afforded as conservators really calls for a thorough understanding of both the object's material and mechanical properties, but also of their social value as an artifact. So if you think about maybe the way a patina develops on a bronze sculpture, or the way a particular signature can add meaning to an otherwise unremarkable book, or the use of certain decorative motifs and materials can offer insight into the age or origin or authenticity of an object, those are the details that we as conservators need to consider before deciding how to approach conservation treatment. And that often calls for research, testing, and discussion with other conservators, and collaboration with our other stakeholders, the curators, patrons, things like this, and other subject matter experts. Because really the object itself is a container for a story, for some part of history. And when conservation is done well, we're not just fixing stuff. We are listening to those stories and trying to keep those stories alive. By contrast, we come to my home bench, which is here. I'm grateful to say, a lovely little efficiency apartment just a mile and a half from the Huntington, which means I get to walk into work every day. But that means that on the other side, I've got, a couple hundred square feet that I really need to make the most of in order to make it suitable as both a living space and a creative space. So I've got a vintage painted wooden desk with some small storage drawers and these amazing cast iron lamps, the steel toolbox on the ground with all of my bookbinding tools. And I'm, overwhelmed by bookshelves on all angles, which are filled with books from my Schweben Buntpapier collection, reference works on bookbinding and decorated papers, and also some reading collections. In a large closet, I have banker's boxes of tools for various book arts, and as well as my own sort of ad hoc photo doc setup, which you can see here is basically just a camera, a color card, some spotlights, and a neutral gray background. This is just some sheets of Canson. The biggest game changer in the last couple of years has been the introduction of an underbed trundle as a flat file. And this was born of the genius of my partner, Jane, who is a fellow bookbinder and conservator and also teaches several intro and core bookbinding workshops at the center. So if you're interested in digging into this field the way that we did, I would highly encourage you to check out some of the offerings that are coming up. I also have a vintage cut trimmer, which you can see is sort of functional furniture, just bookending my couch. I've got a hot stamping machine, a quick print hot stamping machine tucked away in another closet alongside large rolls of cloth and skin. And space really is at a premium here. And while it's not as well equipped as a conservation lab, I really do feel like I have kind of everything I need around me. which is its own kind of delight. So at home, the sort of work that I do, again, includes a lot of private book repair work, which I take on a commission basis, and also bindings, which I mix in with my other projects. And I also have just several banker's boxes of broken books that are waiting for repairs. In many ways, I sort of feel like my ability to fix a book or, see a broken book and know that I can fix it, it comes along with a responsibility to do that and leave a book better than I found it. Even if it's just one more 19th century book that never actually gets read, at the very least, I get to keep my skills sharp. Like many bookbinders, I make my own bone and delrin tools as needed. And I also fill the occasional order through the North Bennet Street School's student store, if you're looking for delrin tools. This desk is also where I conduct most of my personal research on decorated papers and other historical binding topics. I'm especially interested in exploring how material aspects of decorated papers, the colors that are used, the colorants, the pigments, the organization, the patterns, and the development of these over time, whether those can be used to tie objects back to a particular time and place, and tell us more about their history. They're often not signed. There's this sort of very nebulous idea of where papers have come from and what traditions are used in different places. There's trade back and forth in the 18th century. But I'm really hoping that by digging in and doing some close looking and trying to kind of nail down these smaller facets, that we can get a better idea of the importance of every particular paper. So this is again where I collect, photograph, catalog, study, and hold the papers that make up the Schweben Buntpapier collection, which I can show you in just a second. And in addition to collecting these and studying books, I also try to replicate some of those patterns to get a sense of kind of what's possible at a given time, whether it makes practical sense for a particular design to be executed a certain way. And I also publish and teach workshops on some of those topics. Just going to give a quick look here, snapshot of my Schweben Buntpapier collection so you can get a sense. So these are all books that I've acquired over the last 4 or 5 years. The focus is really on the long 18th century and papers that are decorated with colored paste or block printing techniques. And I'm not sure yet, what the most pertinent details are, but I'm hoping that, by giving people the opportunity at large to sort by, the year of publication, or to sort by, whether a particular paper is used as a covering material versus an overcover versus on a wrapper versus end papers, that we can start to uncover, some meaning behind these papers that are already beautiful, but have a story embedded in them somewhere. Can I go back to full screen? Direct it. Sorry, one sec.
It's all right. If you can't, you can just go back to the tab and go from there.
That was the last slide. In the course of normal conversation with people, people ask what I do and what I do. Then they ask what I do for fun. And I'm really grateful to say that I don't really have to choose between those two. I don't have to separate them. The books that I get to handle and treat in the conservation lab inform new questions and binding ideas that I get to bring home. And the bookbinding and decorated paperwork that I do at home adds depth and adaptability to my conservation practice. So I'm really right where I want to be. And I feel that books are similar to genres of music in that way. You may not like all of them. You may not go to a particular artist or genre for your daily listening, but there's there's artistry and something to appreciate in all of them if you're willing to look closely. So I know we're right at 12:55. So thank you all for listening. And if there are any questions, I'm always happy to go off about books.
Thank you, Mitch. Yeah, so if people have any other questions, please feel free to send them in. The first one, Ellen was wondering if conservation bookbinding is a growing or shrinking field and challenges the industry is facing.
Jane told me once, Chad, that people sometimes come in and ask whether you're afraid whether AI is going to take over letterpress printing. And your answer was, excuse me for paraphrasing, but something to the effect of that happened already. You know, handcraft has already, we're talking like mid-19th century, these tasks being kind of overrun by large mass production, things like this. But there's always going to be more books to save. And what I think is really interesting, and I'll try not to go too off the rails, is again, we're preserving stories, not necessarily objects. And so those stories change, and the objects that get prioritized also change over time. And that's not something that you can train a computer to do. That takes heart. You need to be able to dig in and appreciate what the meaning of an object is. And even if you could, train a machine to do the actual surgery on a book, for example, understanding where the value is and what the priorities are and the culture that we're preserving, that's always going to be a human thing, I think.
For sure. And I really appreciate your perspective that it's the stories, because there's no way to save every object. Linda asks, how did you become interested in this very esoteric field?
My dad bought and sold antiques and was a furniture maker. He was actually a pattern maker, which in a time before AutoCAD meant if there was, specs for an engine manifold that needed to be made cast, my dad would actually make that out of wood first, and then they would make the mold from which the metal part would be created. It's a incredible craftsperson, and shifted that into buying and selling antiques and repairing furniture. So I think I was exposed to the idea of taking something that could easily be trash and turning it back into treasure very early. Books maybe was circumstantial, but after I started collecting old books and seeing that they were falling apart, and I took my first workshop at the Center for the Book, and I was like, oh, I can fix these. And I'm like, oh, I'm really enjoying this. I could make a career out of this. It felt very natural at that stage.
That is awesome. And this is a funny question, but I was wondering as well. Hannah wonders, can you ask about the painting image behind you over your desk there? That one.
That technically belongs to Jane, but it looks really good on this wall. I don't know the name of the artist, but at North Bennet Street School, Martha Kearsley teaches the book repair and conservation techniques, and is a letterpress printer, teaches workshops, highly recommend. And her studio mate made this lino print. So it's from somewhere. It's from somewhere in Maine.
It's a nice big lino print.
It's colossal and gorgeous and gives one much to think about.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like we're pretty close to time. Unless anyone else has any other questions, we will go ahead and call that up, because I would just like to extend a huge thank you to Mitchell. It's always amazing. I sit here at the San Francisco Center for the Book and try and keep the studio going for everybody, but it's amazing to hear the many and varied journeys people take once they dive into the history of books and printing. And so thank you so much for this report from the the outer reaches or from the inner reaches, however you want to look at it. But it's just wonderful. And thanks for being part of our community. I'm grateful for you taking the time for this amazing tour. Please join us again next month here From the Bench on October 2nd. The guest will be announced soon. Again, thanks to Mitchell and for all of you for joining us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you again here in our studios as well as online. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. It's great to see you.
Absolutely. All right. Bye.